It is time for the NASCAR DFS strategy show right here at Awesemo.com. Of course, I am Jason Floyd, as always, joined by Phil, a.k.a. Ray Sheets, right here on Awesemo. Phil, man, how you doing here on this Saturday afternoon, man?
All things considered, fantastic, Jason. Great to be here.
Always, of course, it's just afternoon Eastern time here on Awesemo, as we are here to break down Sunday's YellaWood 500 race. And, of course, one of the things as I always say, when I do this show, I like to go over to your preview pieces that you write over there at Awesemo.com and kind of, pick and choose some things that I want to mention about some things you wrote. And the first thing that you wrote about was GPP versus cash lineup and the difference in how you construct these lineups.
Right. I mean, I hate to rehash things because at this point in NASCAR DFS, considering it's been around so long, I'm just going to take the assumption that the majority of people watching, reading articles, playing NASCAR DFS, they know what the script is when it comes to these super speedway races. And I mean, the old try and true method is start guys in the back. And I mean, if you want to double your investment, then that's probably the safest thing that you want to do. But when it comes to actually reaching those top 1% lineups, actually binking a GPP, you've got to think a little bit outside the box. Now, the difference here, when it comes to cash, you are looking for floors. You are looking for the safest plays that you can get based off of place differential and finishing position. So it always comes down to basically take the field, divide it in half, and everybody starting 20th or worse is where the majority of your cash game player pool should come from. When it comes to Daytona, we just kind of add everybody in there because it gets wild and crazy, and everybody, even the punts have the possibility to end up with a top 10 finish. Here at Talladega, not so much. Now, when it comes to GPP plays, we add 1 to 2 of these drivers in the teens or in the single digits into our lineups because they could end up leading some laps. They could end up picking up 10 to 15 spots, maybe, even only in the single digits, but still what they do earns them a top 6 score. So you have to get comfortable getting beyond the cliche of starting drivers in the back for your tournament lineups. You have to allow yourself to get, add a little variance in adding those drivers in the teens and even in the single digits this weekend for your lineups.
And of course, it's always great information that you give there. Of course, if people haven't checked out your articles, you got to go over to Awesemo.com to read the articles that Phil does have up there, as he has articles up there all the time. So you got to check out those articles right there over at Awesemo.com. The next thing that we wanted to discuss in terms of this is Dominators. In terms of, you wrote the line that you had is not stress over Dominators. So kind of talk about that.
Right. I mean, we're looking at somewhere in the range of 180 plus laps tomorrow, depending on what happens with wrecks and overtime and all of that. Now, if this was just your plain Jane normal race with 180 to 200 laps, we'd be talking, okay, this is probably a 1 to 2 Dominator race. But I mean, the lead will change so much between so many different drivers tomorrow that it's going to be really hard to predict just who the top lap leaders are going to be. And beyond that, when it comes to DraftKings, because of the nature of this race and the drafting, fastest laps are going to happen throughout the field. I mean, they are going to be as random as they can possibly get. Practically every driver will have at least one fastest lap, 1 to 5 in that neighborhood tomorrow. So we're not worried about fastest laps because we can't predict where those are going to fall. And with laps led points, it's tough to figure out just who is going to have when. In fact, if you go back to the race that happened in June, I believe we had 57 lead changes during that day. So the lead was constantly swapping hands, and then you add in the factor that you could have a driver that leads a quarter of this race, but just like that, because of a wreck or they get out of the draft, they can lose 10, 15, 20 spots. And all of those laps led points that they accrued, they could be absolutely worthless. So this weekend, once again, we're not worrying about Dominator points. We're just worrying about the ceilings and the floors that these drivers have because of place differential and finishing position.
Another thing that you wrote over at Awesemo.com this week is about potential playoff drivers to target. Kind of so as you look at obviously the standings of another week of playoffs here, of who are the drivers that we should be looking at as potential targets.
Right. Ever since 2014, here in the fall Talladega race, it's been won by a driver that is in the playoffs. So that's, we're talking 5-6 years of a good correlation that a playoff driver is going to win. Now, what can we chalk that up to? Well, that could be several different factors. It could be that the rest of the drivers in the field are giving credence to these playoff drivers and not trying to outrace them for a win, or not trying to wreck them or what have you. But I mean, it's a good strong correlation to pay attention to, and we have a bunch of drivers starting 1st through 12th that we could consider potential winners. We've got guys that have won here at Talladega like Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, Brett Keselowski. Denny Hamlin has been really strong in super speedway races this year. You've also got to consider Eric Almirola, who is the only driver in the field to finish in the top 10 in each of the past 7 Talladega races. So, I mean, setting a rule in Fantasy Cruncher that you're going to have at least one of these guys, that's definitely a way to give yourself some differentiation. But that once again is giving yourself a lot of variance right there.
Of course, everyone who listens to the show weekly, what we do is we break down these drivers into 4 tiers. Tiers 1 is the 11K and 10K drivers on DraftKings. Of course, we have no 11K drivers this week, all in the 10K range. And Tier 2 is 9K and 8K. Tier 3, 7 and 6. And then Tier 4 is 5 and 4K drivers. So let's get right into tier number 1. We only got 3 drivers this week in this tier, Phil. We've got Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, and Kevin Harvick. Chase Elliott starting 10th. He's 10,500 on DK, 11,800 on FanDuel. Joey Logano, he is starting 8th, 10,300 on DK, 11,600 on FanDuel. And Kevin Harvick starting in the 5th spot, 10,100 on DK, 10,500 over on FanDuel. What's your take on these 3 drivers in tomorrow's race?
All right. Chase, the 2019 spring winner, Joey's won here multiple times. In fact, this is something that we'll come up to later, but Penske and especially the Fords have consistently shown the best speed here at the super speedway races. So if you're into the whole idea, well, I'm going to stack a team or stack manufacturers, then the Ford and the Penske, combining those drivers with Stewart-Haas, maybe front row, that's a direction to go. But I like Chase. I definitely like Joey as drivers that you're going to have exposure to as potential winners, drivers that are in the playoffs that need this win to ensure that they lock themselves into the 3rd round of the playoffs. Kevin, I'm not so high on, and you look at his finishes here, they're so, but I think because of where he's starting 5th, that he just seems like he has that much more position to go backwards than actually gain position, and I really don't consider him a serious threat to win. But if you go back to the spring, Kevin was right there fighting with Blaney for the win back in June.
Over in the YouTube chat, Wyatt goes, "Hey Phil, what's your thoughts on Joey Logano this Sunday? He's really good here, but has not made any friends lately to help him in the race. I could see someone spinning him." Thoughts?
Yeah. If this was the spring, I might worry about that a bit more. Yeah. The fall Talladega races seem to be a bit more timid and tepid, if you will say. Like, I think there's this whole understanding around the garage that you don't want to screw up somebody's day, especially if they're in the playoffs. Like, you don't want to be that person and carry that reputation with you. And plus, there's nothing to say that if you try to wreck out Joey, that Joey's not going to take you out in the process along with 10 other cars. So, I don't really worry about that. And I mean, it's not like Joey hasn't been the least popular driver in the garage for a decade now. People have not liked Joey and his attitude ever since he started when he was 18. So that's really nothing new at this point. But I wouldn't give too much credence to that, because when you start considering that stuff, then you have to think about, well, who was Joey riding around with at that time on the track? Could he possibly take them out? Good luck playing that guessing game.
We'll move on to tier number 2, because, well, there wasn't many drivers in tier number 1, but we do have a decent amount of drivers here in tier number 2. We got Brad Keselowski, who's starting 7th, Denny Hamlin, who's on the pole, Kyle Busch starting 6th, Brendan Gaughan 39th. I think we're going to talk about him a lot, especially in terms of his FanDuel pricing against his DraftKings pricing. Then we got Martin Truex Jr. starting 3rd, Ryan Blaney 14th, one back-to-back here. William Byron starting 21st, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. starting 26th, Jimmy Johnson starting 17th, Eric Almirola starting 11th, Clint Boyer starting 9th, Kurt Busch starting 2nd, and Eric Jones starting 16th. I guess, because I know we've already got some questions in the YouTube chat on Brendan, so I guess we probably should just start there. 9,500 on DK. Okay, all right, 9,000. 39th. Okay, point differential. Okay, you got me. But then I go over to FanDuel. He's 5,000. I haven't even looked at our ownership projections yet, but I'm just gonna take a wild guess here that it's insane on FanDuel.
Yeah, there are a couple of things on FanDuel where you look and say, okay, how much effort was really put into the pricing? Because there's a couple of guys, like you look at Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He got priced up to 11,000 this week. I believe Tyler Reddick sitting at 9,600, and those are guys that start 25th or worse. But then you've got Brendan Gaughan. The only time that Brendan ever drives are in these super speedway races. And if you're into narratives, he claims this is going to be his very last Cup race ever. So you've got Brendan Gaughan, a perennial, very good plate super speedway racer, starting absolutely dead last in 39th. There's nowhere for him to go. His average finish over the last 7 races here at Talladega, it's 19th. If you look at what he's done in super speedway races this year, it's 12th. And FanDuel inexplicably prices him at $5,000. I mean, I think it's just a matter of the algo wasn't working or wasn't manually adjusted at FanDuel. And I mean, if you're playing on FanDuel, that's a guy that you can probably just lock into all of your lineups. The 9,500, you may have concern. Well, God, can I really pay that for Brendan? Once again, this is all about finishing position and place differential. And Brendan gives you an amazing floor for cash. Like, if you're playing cash, you absolutely have to lock him in. Mm-hmm. You are risking losing because you simply didn't play Brendan Gaughan. And then in tournaments, you wonder, okay, well, do I really want to play a guy that's going to be so chalky? And our ownership projections right now on Brendan Gaughan on DraftKings have him north of 60%. So is that a guy that I really want to try to match the field at? And I mean, personally, that's a stance that I'm taking. I'm going to play Brendan about 65% of my lineups this week. And once again, this is a week on DraftKings. Don't go crazy. Like, have exposure to a bunch of guys. Like, probably max cap would be 55 to 60%. You may even want to set that lower, like 45 to 50, so that you get a large investment in a bunch of guys in case something were to go on with a wreck or what have you. But when it comes to just Brendan's outlook on DraftKings or FanDuel starting 39th, he's a guy I don't know how you can't play. He's in such a good spot.
Yeah, I was just I was looking at our ownership projections. Yeah, on DraftKings, it's insane at 60%, and by far he is the top driver on FanDuel as well. Not as big of a gap as it is on DraftKings, but on FanDuel. But man, that 5,000 price tag, it definitely is hard. Of course, if you do want access to those ownership projections, you got to sign up for an Awesemo Plus NASCAR weekly pass for $9.95. You see it right there on the left-hand side of the screen. Sign up for that pass now. All you got to do is go to awesemo.com right there on the top left-hand side of the page. Look at the Awesemo Plus. Click on that. sign up for that NASCAR Weekly Pass for $9.95. That'll give you access to our leading driver projections, ownership projections, and the top drivers tool. These are tools that Alex uses every week on NASCAR, and it's why he's the #1 DFS player out there. So you got to take advantage of that offer we got right there at Awesemo.com, the NASCAR Weekly Pass for $9.95 to get those ownership projections, which, look, I'm an MMA guy. I use them all the time because it helps me develop my lineups, especially if you're playing multiple lineups, kind of looking at that ownership projections and seeing where it is. You mentioned about Brendan and where he's at in terms of ownership. Look, I guess the question is with Brendan, I guess this is more, I guess it's a both slates, even though there's a huge price difference, is if you're a single entry player, can you avoid him?
That's a really good question. I think that if you're playing 3 max or single entry this week, that I'm going to say play Brendan, find your differentiation elsewhere by, instead of playing these guys that we'll talk about further on down the line that are that's in the mid 20 range, that you're going to, instead of playing one of those guys, you're going to look to one of these guys in the teens or maybe even a little further up.
I would say if you're playing a 3-entry max, what I would do is I'd put him in 2 lineups and a third one not have him in it.
That's a good strategy.
Just because if something were to happen, say he wrecks, the first part of the race, at least you have at least one lineup out there that is not, potentially just donezo and you're like, well, I guess my day's over in DFS. I think we've all been there. Let's look at the top of this list here. We got Kozlowski 9,900 on DK, 11.2 on FanDuel. Denny Hamlin, who's on the pole, 9,700, 11,400. Kyle Busch starting 6, 9,500, 10.2 on FanDuel. And I thought it was something kind of interesting you wrote about is, the laps led versus fastest lap, and how you have to be more looking at the fastest lap aspect of this as opposed to laps led. Yeah.
I sent out the link earlier in the show to the race sheets, and if you're at home or you're on your laptop and you've got the race sheets pulled up, head on over to the start finish heat map. Look at the average fastest laps. I mean, it is amazing. Everybody gets access to the fastest laps. It's just a matter of where you're at on the track. Either who's pushing you, who you're behind. So, I mean, everybody literally has access to the fastest laps. And it's also kind of funny looking back over the past seven races that you look positions 1 through 20, and there's a lot of people that have access to the laps led too. So, I know it's we're beating a dead horse with this. But the Dominator points, they're just nothing to stress out about when it comes to creating your lineups. And since you're not fretting about Dominators, once again, don't worry about salary. I mean, if you have thousands of dollars of salary left over, whether DraftKings or FanDuel, just disregard it because you are focused on 2 main things this weekend.
Yeah, and of course, everyone just go to your Twitter account and put that in there. So that is something that to check that out over on Phil's Twitter account, where you can sit there and put that in there. So be sure to take advantage of that and what we see there in terms of that. In terms of some other drivers in this range, Ryan Blaney, I guess, is someone we definitely got to talk about, starting 14th, and the fact that he's won here back to back.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to say Blaney has figured it out at Talladega, because before the fall win last year, which happened on a Monday, you look at his finishes, it was a 15th, a 29th, an 18th, an 18th, and a 39th. And then all of a sudden the light clicked on and he wins in the fall. And then again, he wins in June, barely narrowing out Ricky Stenhouse Jr. In fact, this year, you look at the 3 super speedway races, so the 2 Daytona races and then Talladega, Blaney's average finish is 3rd. The only guy better than him is Denny Hamlin with an average finish of 2.7. And those are the only guys with average finishes in the like 5th or better. So Blaney has figured it out. Blaney's got nothing to lose. I mean, he can go balls to the wall, go for a win. It's not going to hurt him. He has a little bit of place differential. He definitely has the ability to lead. I believe he definitely led the most laps in that June race. He's one of those guys that if you're going to pick one or two drivers from the teens to add into your player pool, he should definitely be there.
Yeah, it's in terms of some other drivers. I think you kind of mentioned Ricky Stenhouse Jr. a little bit. He's starting 26, so point differential is something you sit there. Let me ask you about Kurt Busch starting second. What's your take on him?
Kurt's kind of hit or miss here at Talladega. He's got finishes of 9th, 6th, and 2nd and 6th, but then that's paired with the 28th, the 14th, and a 25th. Yeah, the thing that scares me the most about Kurt is that he starts second. So I mean, he's not a guy that I'm really going to consider as a legitimate threat to win. He's not a guy that I'm going to consider as a threat to, really lead laps. So I think really the only thing in his future is just to kind of fall back a few positions and I think you're probably hoping for a top 10 finish, but if the top 10 finish means that he's 7th or 8th and he's losing place differential, and there's a bevy of guys that are probably going to outscore him.
In terms of some other ones that we haven't mentioned here, William Byron starting 21st. Eric Jones starting 16th. Truex Jr. starting 3rd.
Truex Jr. I never ever, regardless of where he starts, ever play at plate races. I don't know if he's ever made a public comment about it, but I bet that tracks like Daytona and especially Talladega, they're just tracks that he does not enjoy racing at. You look at Truex's finishes going back the last 7 races: 23rd, 26th, 20th, 23rd, 26th, 23rd, 35th. So it seems like he's destined for a finish in the 20s. Those 7 races, only 3 lead lap finishes. He's only finished 4 out of those 7 races. Byron, he's in the starting area that we want for our player pool, but his finishes have kind of been all over there. His best finish was his finish in June of 11th. He's a guy that I'm going to consider part of those drivers starting in the teens, where I don't want him like as a major part of my core, but if I mix and match him and have maybe 15 to 20%, then that's something I can live with. And I think you can make the same case for Eric Jones. Eric I think he's been better at Daytona than he has been at Talladega, and there is a little bit of a different driving style between the two tracks, but Eric starts far enough that he could end up getting there because of his place differential. So another guy in this teens area that you could sprinkle in with your lineups.
We'll move on to Tier 3 drivers. These are drivers in the 7K and 6K range on DraftKings. So we've got Tyler Reddick starting 30th, Bubba Wallace starting 27th, Alex Bowman starting 4th, Austin Dillon starting 12th, Matt D starting 13th, Christopher Bell 22nd, Ryan Newman 19th, Corey LaJoy 29th, Ryan Pierce 25th, Ty Dillon 28th, Cole Custer 18th, and Chris Buescher number 15. I guess let's Alex Bowman starting 4th at his price point. What's your thoughts there?
But Bowman, I think where he's at is probably where he's going to be locked at for the rest of the year. I don't see that's assuming that he continues to move up through the playoffs. Maybe once he's out of the playoffs, then the sights will adjust. But for this weekend and probably for next weekend at the Roval, he's kind of just stuck in this range. And we've seen Bowman be better at Talladega than he has been at Daytona. He's starting 4th, so he's kind of, his ceiling is kneecapped a little bit, but we've seen him lead laps here. We've seen him do better in the fall races. His fall finishes have gone. Actually, no, it's his spring. I hate to say it. His spring finishes have been better. His spring finishes have gone 7th, 2nd, and 8th, while his fall finishes have been 37th and 33rd. So if you think there's something to that, there's a reason to jump off. But Bowman's a tough guy to add in, but he's done fairly well in super speedway races this year. That he's another like 5 to 10% guy for your lineups.
Tyler Reddick starting 30th, 79 on DK, 9,600 though over on FanDuel. Do you prefer him on one slate as opposed to the other?
Probably DraftKings, because remember on FanDuel you're only getting half a point for every position that you gain. So what Reddick makes available is a lot more valuable on DraftKings. Is like I'm not gonna project Reddick for a top 10 finish. So to make him valuable at 9,600 on FanDuel, he does need probably like a top 10 finish. But here on DraftKings, 7,900 has all that place differential. That's a guy that I don't want to say that he should be in your cash team, but his floor is really super safe for cash. Bubba Wallace is the guy that I prefer more. Bubba over the three super speedway races this year has the fifth best average finish of 11.3. All the momentum in the world with the news. We talked about that last week. Starting 27th, he's got plenty of place differential. Bubba is definitely a guy that should be in the majority of your lineups this weekend. And you go down, Austin Dillon. He has his moments in super speedway races. Of course, we'll all remember when he won at the Daytona 500 a couple of years ago. He'll show up, but back in June, he finished 39th. Matt D, another guy that does not like super speedway races. He's a guy that I will just X out on Fantasy Cruncher. And then you got Bell and you got Newman, guys that I don't think should be core plays, but they can be added in there because they're right on the fringe of the starting grid of where we're looking at.
Of course, you are watching the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here on Awesemo.com. Of course, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button. Of course, by the way, if you cannot catch our show live, it is available on demand after the show's over on the Awesemo Podcast Network, so be sure to check that out over there. Let me ask you about Bubba Wallace, because just kind of some of the stuff you were saying there about him. Would you say he is a core cash game play this week?
I think so, because of that place differential and as well as he's run. I think that he is just – there's nothing safe in these types of races, but I think that he is pretty safe with all things considered.
I was thinking about this. It was based on something you wrote this week of like, hey, don't be fearful of having several $1,000s left in your salary pool. And I'm just thinking just on FanDuel – if I put Bubba Wallace and Brendan Gaughan together, that's only $11,000 I've spent. So like I'm sitting there going, and I'm thinking as a cash play right there of pairing those two together, and pretty much once you pair those two together, pretty much get whoever else you want.
Yeah. You literally can make any lineup that you want, and because DraftKings actually goes to the effort to price up these place differential guys, you may not be able to just mix and match everybody that you want. But if you follow the basic roster guidelines that we've talked about all morning and afternoon, you will, in the majority of your lineups, be left over with several thousands of dollars. I mean, your cash lineup should be left over somewhere in the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 range.
Looking at our ownership projections, one of the drivers that's in this range that is getting decent ownership over there, Christopher Bell at 7,000 on DK.
I think that is if that's where the field is wanting to go, I think that's going to be a point where I pivot. He starts 22nd, so he's definitely within that range. But I think I just like all of those guys starting further behind him, and then you've got guys starting ahead of him that we've already talked about, like Eric Jones, add Jimmy Johnson to that, Ryan Blaney. Like, these are all guys that I think actually have better ceilings because of finishing position than Christopher Bell. So I mean, if Bell's going to be a semi-core play around the industry, that's a great jumping off point.
Looking over at the FanDuel ownerships, Matty D is the lowest owned in this tier in terms of all these drivers. But the starting 13th, does that concern you?
Yeah, because I mean, he's only got so much place differential that he can gain, and plus, what he's done in his history as a racer at plate races, it is not good. Because we talked about it. You average out those last 7 races, his average finish is is 26th. But then something you should always do is not just consider average finish, but look at their average running position, because sometimes the average finish doesn't always paint the tail. That average running position is somewhere around 19th. So even at that point, Matt's really not doing anything to put himself forward. And I mean, yeah, there's definitely strategy to that, because there'll be a guy like, Brendan will probably hang around the back all day tomorrow and then decisively start making his moves up to the front with about 20 to 15 to go. But with Matty D, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that progression forward and actually picking up positions.
Ty Dillon is getting very similar ownership on DK as opposed to Christopher Bell. He's starting 28th. He's 6,300 on DK.
Yeah, Ty, once again, he's in a race where nothing is safe. He is probably one of your safer bets. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that, I mean, is perfectly suited for your cash lineups. 7 races here, 7 lead lap finishes, average finish of 13th, average running position of 18. So he's another guy that makes a late move. We've always kind of worried about his ceiling because he's had no finish better than 10th. But if you look at the 3 super speedway races this year, yeah, his average finish is 21.3. So dragged down by a bad Daytona race. But I mean, if you want to separate Daytona from Talladega, then Ty Dillon is definitely your man this week. But he is going to carry some ownership because of that track history.
Of course, coming up after we speak about the Tier 4 drivers, we will get into your listeners' questions. So start firing those in right now over on our premium Slack accounts. Also here on YouTube, you leave the question over in our premium NASCAR Slack account. Our subscribers do take priority, so we'll get to those, but we'll also get to those YouTube questions as well. Now, as we look at Tier 4, which is everyone underneath 6K, so we got Matt Kenseth, Daniel Suarez, Michael McDowell, John Hunter Nemechek, Justin Haley, James Davidson, Timmy Hill, Joey Gase, Quinn Hoff, Brennan Poole, and Cody Ware. Let's start with Matt Kenseth, starting 20th at 5,900. What's your take there?
Woo! And Matt's return to racing, aka return to super speedway racing back in June. He finished dead last. And Matt was probably a better Daytona racer than he was a Talladega racer. Matt's on the fringe, but like I have 0 shares of Matt Kenseth this week, and I think that he's more destined to fall backwards than he is to go forwards. I think I saw that Suarez, strangely enough, is picking up some ownership. Yeah, he's looking at 24% ownership, and that's another driver that I think you can totally get away from. People are going to play that because of where he's starting at, but his last 2 finishes here at Talladega, they've gone 28th and 32nd. If you look at what he's done this year, so it's only 2 races for Gaughan brothers because they failed to qualify for the 500. Then they raced in Talladega. Then they raced in the Coke Zero 400. His finishes were 26th and 28th. So, I don't really know if Suarez has a ceiling here. Financially, it may be better off for that team just to finish the race than for him to actually try to compete for a top 15 or a top 20. You got to love John Hunter Nemechek. It makes no sense how the driver that we project almost every week to find himself into a wreck is one of the better super speedway racers. In June, his first race here in a Cup car, he finished 8th. You go to his averages over the 3 races this year, it's 10th, I believe. Let me look here. Yeah, that puts John as the 4th best average finish this season in the super speedway races. And just above him is a driver in this range, which would be Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher has an average finish of 6th in the 3 super speedway races. Buescher's always been a good super speedway racer. Let's see here. Yeah, finished 6th in the spring. He picked up a bunch from AJ Allmendinger back when he was racing for JTG Doherty, and it's spilled over there and stayed there. And you can say the same thing for Ryan Preece. We didn't talk about him in that previous tier, but Priest has been a good super speedway racer in his own right. So I think if you're in this area for whatever reason, I think my favorite may actually be Chris Buescher. I think Chris Buescher is one of those guys in the teens that you need to have exposure to as a possible top 5 finish that ends up with a top 6 score.
Yeah, you mentioned about Suarez. He's actually got the most ownership that we're seeing in DK in terms of this under 6K range. I know we've got a couple questions about Justin Haley, starting 35th, 54 on DK, 5,500 on FanDuel.
Haley's always going to be a guy that people want to play because in the 2018 Coke 0400 he won after that race was called to rain. But I remember that before the pit strategy, he was nowhere to be found. He just had a crew chief who said, "Hey, we've got nothing to lose. Let's stay out, see if they don't call this race for rain." And lo and behold, that happened. The Daytona 500 earlier this year, he had a great finish, but you look at what he's done at Talladega, one race, started 38th, finished 32nd. And that's a theme that you'll see among these punt drivers here at Talladega is there's not really that much forward momentum for these guys, and especially in the fall races, because once again, they don't want to get themselves mixed up with the front because that's where all the playoff drivers are at. So these guys are just trying to more or less finish the race. Haley's a guy that you could sprinkle in 5 to 10% of your lineups because of that place differential, but I mean he's definitely not a core play.
Yeah, of course, we're going to get into your questions here momentarily, so start firing those over, whether it's on our Slack channel or also on YouTube. Do want to let you know about a promo that we got going on over at Awesemo.com and get a $5 Awesemo Plus NBA Weekly Pass for the NBA Finals for $5 using the promo code Orlando at checkout. That's $10 off the original price. It gives you access to Awesemo's leading NBA DFS player projections, ownership projections, and more for every showdown and single slate game. This offer is valid through Sunday, October the 4th. Also, for our NFL DFS players out there, for only $3.95, you can purchase an NFL Weekly Express Pass, which now includes everything you need for NFL Showdown, single game contest formats. You now get access to Awesemo's Showdown single game player projections, ownership projections, and the top plays tool when you purchase this pass, in addition to player rankings, lineup builder light, ownership rankings, and the top stacks express tool. All you got to do is go over to awesemo.com/join to sign up for a NFL Express Weekly Pass for $3.95. What a great deal that I know doing the shows with Alex, that's a deal that he came up together. Wanted to offer something for our listeners out there, so you got to check that out. So we'll get right into the questions over whether you put it in Slack, also whether maybe you put it here in YouTube. We will get to your questions and comments, kind of scroll through some of it. We talked a little about Justin Haley, so Wyatt had asked about him already. So hopefully, Wyatt, we answered what you're looking for. Wyatt also asked about John Hunter Nemechek. You talked about him already, so kind of get in there. Next one says cheap plays, McDowell, Ty Dillon, and Timmy Hill.
I can get behind Ty Dillon for sure. Michael McDowell, like before this year, he wasn't a good super speedway racer, but this year he's improved a whole lot more. Every finish in the super speedway races has been a top 20 finish, and 2 of those were top 15 finishes. So, even though he starts 24th, and I guess you could make the same argument for John Hunter Nemechek, even though they start a little further up than you might like, they're in the perfect range. So add them to your player pool. Timmy Hill, like if you're just wanting to absolutely just have exposure to a punt play because you're trying to play an ownership percentage game here, don't play Timmy Hill. Instead, play Brennan Poole. Brennan has actually shown a little bit of a ceiling for these drivers in the 3 races. He's got 2 top 20 finishes, an average finish of 22nd in these races, starting 32nd. So he's got place differential. He's shown the willingness, I guess you would say, to actually want to move forward in these types of events, while the rest of the guys, they seem pretty content to just hang around.
Next up, White says, who are your favorite 2 drivers for Sunday?
Oh, if we're just talking like pure expectations to win, it's probably either Ryan Blaney or Denny Hamlin. So like if you're willing to fire off some betting tickets on outright winners, those would be the guys that I'm looking at. But uh, when it comes down to DFS, it's I hate to eat the chalk with a guy that's going to be so heavily owned, but it's definitely going to be Brendan Gaughan, and the other guy that I'm looking at is going to be surprise surprise Corey LaJoy. Really like Corey LaJoy this week. I this is not political. This is not political, but God, I hope he's not running the Trump paint scheme, because every time he runs that Trump paint scheme, the car breaks down. It's cursed. Like something's happening. So if he's running the Trump paint scheme, I may need to look at my ownership percentages again. But Corey's been so stinking good at super speedway races, and he never gets the ownership that he deserves based off of what he's done. He's been so good. He's got tons of place differential. Those are two guys that I really like this weekend.
Dave asked about potentially a Penske stack in GPP.
That's you see, if you're two at the most,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't run out Blaney, Keselowski, and Logano, because we talk about the Dominator points. The fastest laps are gonna be all over the place. The laps led, they're gonna be hard. They're gonna be hard to predict. Having that many guys in the top 15, you're really cutting your legs out from underneath you about how much ceiling that you give yourself exposure to. You really need all six of your drivers to kind of hit a 50-point threshold. And in order for that to happen with those three guys, you all need them to finish like top five and lead somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 laps apiece.
Next up, White says favorite play 6,700 and below. I'm guessing that's a DraftKings question.
Right. Yeah. If we're not going to do the Corey LaJoy experience, then it's probably either Ryan Preece or Ty Dillon this week.
Next up, the upper deck says stack the back.
Not this week. It's something that we do at Daytona because of the volatility of that track. I mean, you can have multiple drivers that start in the 30s that end up with with top 10 fantasy scores, but because of the way that the field is set now, there's just no real ceiling plays in this area. I mean, like if this were a typical year where COVID-19 was not impacting things, then we might have a few, random good drivers starting in the 30s. But this week we really don't. So it undercuts that strategy of saying, well, I'm just going to play everybody starting, 28th, 29th, and beyond.
Next up, JT says I'm hearing drivers are saying they expect this race to be a tame. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. In fact, that's kind of an expectation that I've seen a lot myself, that they think there's going to be a lot of just riding around for the first couple of segments and maybe even into the latter part of the final segment. And then with 20 to 30 laps, that's when drivers will start getting aggressive and making their way forward. And if that's the way that this race is going to be, that it's going to be pretty tame, then you might open yourself up to having a maximum of 3 drivers from the teens and the single digits. Because if we don't have wrecks, then these drivers up front aren't moving back, and the drivers in the 30s aren't moving forward. So it makes a lot of sense that if this is going to be a green, fairly clean race for Talladega, then you'll want more exposure from these drivers in the teens and single digits.
Next up, you're asked about your thoughts on Jimmie Johnson.
Jimmy, he's been a so-so super speedway racer, but I mean, we're not caring about that. All that we care about is that he starts 17, so he's got a little bit of place differential, but he has more that he can lose than he can gain. He's a guy that you should probably have in, like if you're doing 20 max, then you might want a couple of shares of him, but probably no more.
Alan says, I heard Timmy Hill is in better equipment this week. Thoughts?
Um, that'd be fantastic if he is, because that starting 37th, he's definitely probably got outside of Brendan Gaughan, he's got the most place differential to gain out of all of these guys, and I'll have to look into that and see, perhaps he's gotten a little bit of a bolster. I know that when his Xfinity team has ran at Super Speedway in the past, that Joe Gibbs has funneled a little extra money or what have you towards that team because they run a Toyota in that series. But this week I haven't heard that, but I'll look into that. If he's getting extra money, that's great. But remember, these cars were all basically the same. Mm-hmm. The car that Ryan Blaney has is going to be practically equal to the car that Michael McDowell has. So, really on the surface, even if they're getting extra investment, it doesn't mean that their car is really that much better.
Yeah, I just mentioned on Jimmy Johnson, just kind of looking at his ownership projections. I mean, kind of he's in that range of just about the same as Chase Elliott. So, but obviously you have to pay $2,000 less for Jimmy Johnson. So that's something to take advantage into, of course. Phil, if people ever have questions for you, obviously they can hit you up on the premium site account, but also let them know where to follow you out on Twitter, man.
Yep, look me up on Twitter at Race Sheets. My preview, my DK FanDuel picks article, the Race Sheets, they're all open, free for you guys to use this week. It's a great week to go multi-mass entry, and I believe tomorrow afternoon is when my office hours for Awesemo Slack are going to be. So if you've got your lineup questions, hit me up then, and we'll help you get your lineup set.
Yeah, I'll be in Slack today for the MMA, as of course MMA Live Before Lock will come up here at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 hour before the UFC card. Also come here today on Awesemo. We've got the NFL DFS Contrarian picks. That'll come up here at 2:30. So you got to check out all this stuff going on here at Awesemo.com. Of course, be sure to hit that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Hit that notification bell so when you know a new show is coming live. So that's going to do it for this week's edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here on Awesemo.com.